Your code is slow and inefficient, but there's a way to fix that with promises. But first, you have to learn what an async task is. Like this, you're baking a cake, but you also need to make the icing. Instead of putting the cake in the oven and waiting for that to bake and then making the icing, the best thing to do would be to put the cake in the oven and make the icing at the same time. You see, a lot of JavaScript operations happen where you bake the cake and then make the icing, and that's called a synchronous operation. But some tasks take time, like downloading data from a server. Just like this cake, it would be inefficient to wait for that to be done and then run the rest of our code. So asynchronous tasks run at the same time as our main code. And JavaScript handles all of these asynchronous tasks with promises. Now, a promise adds one extra thing to this analogy. I want you to think of this promise just like a box. When you start baking your cake, this box is empty, and that's what you would call the pending stage. Now, when this cake has finished baking, one of two things is going to happen. One, you end up putting a beautifully baked cake into this box. Or two, you end up putting a note in there saying, sorry, this cake is burned. But either way, this box or this container will hold the result of this cake or this asynchronous task. Now, I don't want you to get overwhelmed by all of this code. I'm going to briefly explain it and run it so you can see how promises behave so differently from regular code. Now, the first thing we're going to do is call this bake cake function. So after 3 seconds, we're going to return this right here. Cake is baked. After we call this bake cake function, we're going to call this make icing function. And it's just going to log out icing is done. So now if you run this code, you see icing is done gets logged to the console way before cake is baked gets logged to the console, even though bake cake was called first. And the reason why is because bake cake is asynchronous. It kicks off and then it continues in the background. And that's the power of promises and asynchronous tasks. They allow time-consuming work to happen without blocking the rest of your code. Now here's how it works. You're going to call this bake cake function. And in this bake cake function, you're going to return a new promise. Now these two keywords, new promise, that creates the container or that little box that's going to hold the result of our asynchronous task. Just like the box holds the result of our cake. Now this promise takes one function and two parameters, and that's the resolve and reject parameters. The resolve parameter is for entering that success state when that cake is beautifully baked, and reject for the failure state, like when we burn our cake and we have to put a note in there saying sorry. Inside this promise function, we're going to create a set timeout, and that's going to run for 3 seconds. Now during this time, that container is still empty, so it's in what's called the pending stage. Now after those 3 seconds, you're going to call resolve. And in resolve, you're going to pass some sort of information. It could be a string, it could be a list, or even an object. But you have to pass some sort of information into the success state. Now, as soon as you call this resolve function, your promise and that successful information is going to go inside this container. But how do you actually access that information? Well, that's by using .then. What it's saying is that as soon as this promise is successful, then handle this successful state of the promise. And this .then is going to take a function and one parameter, and that parameter is going to be this data that you resolved. So whatever is in that container is now put into this data. And once inside that function, you can use that information however you would like, just like logging it to the console. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below and I'll make sure to answer them. And in the description, there's a GitHub repo full of real-world examples and a bunch of comments explaining promises. And while you're down there, you might as well subscribe. Now here's the catch. Promises are only useful when working with asynchronous tasks, not CPU-intensive tasks. So if you're working with things like timers, network requests, or file operations, promises would be so helpful in those situations. But if you're processing a large data set or running loops, promises aren't going to help you very much. While promises are so helpful in a lot of situations, they are not the end-all be-all. But I encourage you to go to that GitHub repo and play around with a lot of those examples to deepen your knowledge, and then go build something great.